Everybody, Thru Port Collective here. We're doing our weekly show, and glad you guys can join us. We're here to talk about music, audio, side stories, anecdotes, tech talk, kind of everything. It's the experience between not only Marshal Arnold and Cryss Smith and myself, but the good people in the chat room. We always have lots of good input and questions and their own experiences. So we are here to do that. This is more than just a synth show. We like to talk about much more broader subjects, and today's is going to be plugins, which is cool and a crazy, gigantic subject. And I know, again, if you tuned in last week with the DAW's episode that we had, Marshal's kind of mostly an Ableton Live user rather, and Cryss is Logic, and I typically use Pro Tools, although I think we can all skate around on the other ones a little bit. But so it'd be cool to kind of talk about the advantages and disadvantages of our DAWs and the plugins that we have available. And yeah, it's going to be a cool subject. So thanks for joining us. I'm here at my brother's. This is not quite my. This isn't the Sonic Cave for me. This broadcast. I'm down in Dallas, Texas, at my brother's. So he was kind enough to let me have a room here, and they're sequestered. They're sequestered in the back of the house. But
as Marshall said, the book review room.
Yeah, this is the book review room for sure. We were talking about the difference between protagonists and just basically characters that just sort of stir up the plot. So please stick around for that. That'll be coming up after the show has disconnected.
There'll be a signing at the end.
That'll be after we're no longer live streaming. That'll be on.
Hey, just a quick plug. Our friend Chris Stack is in the chat, and he was just on the Mr. Wiggly show on Sunday, and it was a good episode. So I encourage everybody to go check it out.
Awesome.
Yeah, what's up, Chris? And we got Paul Artola, and Paul is talking about Dallas as hot as UK. Yeah, I bet it is. I'm just going to take a wild guess and say if you're anywhere around the century mark, then yeah, we're as hot as you, I guess. No, wait, you're in
Maryland. Paul's in
Maryland. That's right. Yeah. Anyway, well, cool. So a quick little how do you do and catch up. Marshall, you want to kick us off with what you've been up to?
Yeah, I have been working on my live project. It's going pretty good. I have set so the whole thing that I'm working on is extremely complex in terms of like MIDI, and I have kind of the fundamentals set for the first kind of track that I'll do, and then I'm working on figuring out how best to work program changes for patches and how to just kind of dynamically change patterns in Blue Arp to progress through different songs, basically. So that's going to take a little while because there's a lot to kind of figure out there, but that's what I've been working on.
When you say dynamically change, are you referring to like having patch changes in the sequencer or in the sequence itself? Or?
Yeah, so Blue Arp has the hardware. Blue Arp has a lot of really granular functionality, and you can program patterns and associate patches with the pattern on a per instance basis, because the Blue Arp hardware is basically 8 instances of the Blue Arp plugin. So I'm trying to figure out how best to go about making the changes between patterns and patches to basically transition seamlessly into new songs. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, yeah, you got to definitely like keep us up to date on that and share.
Yeah. So once I get far enough along, I haven't done any YouTube videos in a while, but I'll be doing some stuff, and I'll probably touch on some of that once it's a little further along.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's going to be really interesting to see how you kind of suss that out.
Yeah, that's a lot of trial and error and figuring out kind of the best way. I've never done anything like this. It's pretty crazy. So hopefully it turns out well.
Yeah, that's awesome and interesting. Cool. Yeah, definitely share that.
It's a good project. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Cryss, what's happening in your world? Tell us about what you've been up to.
Well, I wish I could say more. Starting to feel better. I still really haven't done much since last Wednesday when we had our shows. Starting to feel a little bit better. So yeah, not much. I've been taking it easy. I haven't been in here at all really since last Wednesday, and mainly just been trying to rest and playing a lot of guitar, which has been nice because that's easy to take onto the couch. So been nice to get some of those chops back up. But looking forward to kind of catching up on some work in the next couple of days, and then really start getting back to things on Monday. So yeah, and other than that, of course, like on top of all of that, like you're like, oh, I'm not feeling good and stuff, and then got in the mail the jury duty. So I just made so for here, like they have you call in for 5 days, and every time you call, you're like, oh man, am I have to go in or not? And the last time that I had a jury duty call in was 11 years ago, and I had to go in, and they have there's 2 courthouses that you could go to, and of course I ended up having to go to the far one, and was on about a week long or 2 week long trial. So that was a little bit challenging, but yeah, so far I've made it through 4 days, and I got my last call in tomorrow evening, and hoping that it'll be done.
Wow. Yeah. It used to. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh no, I was just going to say something else. Go ahead.
I was just saying it used to be that you could, if you were self-employed, you could let them know that, and then you would get off the hook for that, because obviously, that's your work. You can't take jury time off or anything and get paid, right? There's no PTO happening in the world of self-employed folks. So I don't know.
I figured if I got called in and they're like, so at least for here, it's like $15 a day. I would say, well, shoot, man, for being a musician, that's like a raise, to be.
I don't know what I'll do with all that cash.
Yeah, put me on, man.
I'm going to buy a new
take it.
at the end of the day. That's amazing. Only funny because it's kind of true.
Well, they had the trial that I was on. The judge was telling stories, and he was saying that there are people that really probably retired people and whatnot that try to get on trials. They try to get on long trials just for the entertainment.
I could see that, like especially if you're older and maybe retired like that, and you don't have much going on, give you some excitement. It's better than watching it on TV, like Judge Judy. You can actually be there,
Yeah, our judge was a older guy, and like come about 2:00 in the afternoon, he was out, just in the chair, like asleep. But it was a trial. Somebody injured themselves at Disneyland, and so this family was suing Disneyland. Bad jungle ride experience, jungle cruise. Yeah.
Wow. Dude's napping here. He's been down that road before, obviously.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and when that was going on, next door, the courtroom next door had the trial for the Obama birth certificate stuff going on, and the people that were in the news, they had television crews and stuff, down the hallway from us with all that stuff going on. So it was an interesting experience. Like it sucks to have to take out time from work to go and do that, but it's a duty, and also can be quite fascinating as far as how it all works. So
for sure.
As long as you're not the one sitting in the hot seat,
yeah,
experience it that way.
Yes.
So for Paul there, yeah, that's been playing my new guitar pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've been doing is just playing that guitar. So,
Well, Tim, what's up? What's been going on with you, man?
Oh man, let's see. Well, I've been here in Dallas for this whole week and traveling, so obviously not much happening here other than just taking care of some family personal biz, which is cool. And then last week, I was working. I've got a couple tunes I'm working on that are sort of in the box things with some vocals. They have like sort of thematic, like a phrase that would be sung, and then it's instrumental sort of around it. But as they're developing, there's a little more vocal coming into these. I'm kind of trying this sort of, it's this thought I've had, just kind of a way to go about creating a song that has a little bit of vocal in it, but so there's something to kind of anchor your teeth in or whatever, latch onto if you want some lyric, but then there's a lot of instrumental stuff too in it. So I'm excited about goofing with that, and that's kind of how I spent about the last half of last week. Just kind of getting all that together. And I'm almost finished with one of them, and one is me singing, and then the other one I'm doing actually has this. I think I mentioned to you guys before, this Malaysian female vocalist, and she's done some really cool vocalizations to the basic chord changes, and then I'm going to kind of go back and essentially, I guess, sort of chop and fly and, kind of make a thing happen with that, because she's literally in Malaysia and it's like 13 hours difference. So we kind of have to just send her something. And then during the night, she sends me back something at 3 a.m. or something while I'm snoozing. So,
yeah.
So yeah, it's cool. So that's kind of what I've been up to this week. And, I did get I guess I mentioned to you guys, I'm going to do another horror film. It's a short. So I did get this director likes to send us or send the composer rather, he likes to send them the script ahead of time so that you can kind of start getting on the page about what it is, which I think is great, rather than them having already a bunch of images cut together and almost a finished product, and then they bring you in. And then you kind of have to play a lot of catch up emotionally and with the plot and everything. So yeah, he's
waiting on you. Yeah.
So he's pulling me in from the get go, which is really going to be cool. I don't really know the length of it or hardly much of anything. I just know they're going to be starting shooting after the first of the year, so it's not going to happen real fast. But cool just to get that and kind of read the script, in the air and kind of imagine what this might be. So. I just have to be careful not to preconceive the notion too much, because he may, because I can probably start already going down roads in my head about it just from reading the script, but then he may come back in a few months and say, so here's what I'm thinking, and it could be completely different from what I was thinking. So I'm just laying back on that. I'm just going to kind of read it and stay like an open slate. Anyway, that's what's going on in my world.
That's awesome.
So, it just kind of reminds me, I don't really watch horror, but sometimes when we get bored, like we'll check out some like old low budget sci-fi, and which is very hit or miss. But we watched the absolutely terrible movie. It was awful to get through, but it had a really interesting soundtrack to it. It was called something like Planet of the Dinosaurs or something like that, about a space crew who gets stranded on this, whatever Paleolithic or whatever planet. It was 1980, and there's like stop motion dinosaurs, filmed at what is that place called? Like something like Valdez Rock or
Vasquez Rocks.
Vasquez, yes. Yeah, where Star Trek and where Kirk fights the Gorn and like, oh wait, I know where that is. But the cool thing about it was that it had like tons of synthesizer on the soundtrack. There was a few other little instruments, some like a little bit of guitar and some more acoustic elements, but it sounded like it might have been a 2600. There's like spring reverb going on and ring modulation, and there was some other sort of echo, like maybe a space echo or something. And I couldn't really find any information out on it because sometimes you can, kind of dig into it and look it up online and find who the composer was. But this was so low budget that it was difficult. But it made it for an interesting watch only because of the soundtrack.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a lot of those older ones for sure, are just they're all, like you said, hit or miss. But I am also a big fan of cheesy, crappy, old, amazing sci-fi. Kind of, it's weird. Like the kind of the campier, the better for me. But then there is a drop off point, right? Where it's like, okay, I can't. No, I can't.
Yeah, I mean, if they've got a good plot and the actors are decent, the storyline is good, I can deal with some like bad special effects. It's just when the movie plot doesn't work or it's not very good, that's what kind of makes me go, ah.
It's like some of those movies those guys on Red Letter Media watch. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them. They've got a channel on YouTube where they review a bunch of stuff. And sometimes they'll do best of the worst, and it's like the most terrible movies you've ever heard of.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, I mean, like I was just sitting there thinking because of our topic, that I will rely somewhat on outboard synths, but it's going to mostly probably be
some plugins, right?
Plugins, man. Because it's quicker and it's definitely more recallable and editable on the fly. So I think that's probably going to mostly be what I did. This will be my third film that's over 10 minutes. The first one I did actually was an hour 20, so it was a full length guy, and that was what a place to start. But it was cool. It was super challenging. But I did a fair amount of outboard stuff with that, and then just saved patches and did as much as I could with patch library and whatnot like that. And I kind of stuck to just like using my subsequent 37 and certain things where I did have editors and I could kind of go, I can get back to that. I know I can.
Yeah.
Instead of like if I was using the matriarch or something that didn't have some kind of way to recall patches, that'd be I don't know, it's frightening.
That can be a bit tough. My buddy was doing the patch book on the matriarch, and even with the patches on in writing, you're like moving stuff just a little bit, and it sounds terrible. And all of a sudden, you get to that one point, and they're like, "Oh, that's the way the patch is supposed to sound." So, at least you have the advantage of having been the one that created the patch for that sound to be able to get back to it easier rather than recreating somebody else's work.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously, so much of the beauty of that instrument or any instrument like that that's any kind of a Eurorack thing or something that doesn't have any sort of patch saving. That's certainly the thrill and the tightrope that you're walking is, well, can I get back to that or do I have to? And probably not. Hit record. Let's go. Let's put some stuff down and okay, there it is. That's what that's going to be from now on, kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
I've had
that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say. So I did a film score once for a mockumentary. So it was like a comedic play on a documentary about ghosts, and it was in the early 2000s. So that was kind of experience I had, and that was super low budget, independent. You can find it on IMDb. It's called Ghost Hunter. And then the only other thing I've ever done of note, I guess, would be I had a track of mine placed in a movie once, but it was another one of those kind of independent things. But it was a feature film, which was awesome.
I saw where you posted about that, Marshall, and I chased that down, and I tried to skim through the film because it didn't have an exact timestamp on it where to go.
Oh, it's like right at the beginning. It's like the first 2 or 3 minutes of the movie.
Oh, I probably skipped right over it.
Yeah, you must have skipped it.
Everywhere else.
Like right at the beginning. Like you can watch the first 5 minutes. I don't even think it's that far in.
Oh, okay, that's hilarious. I'll have to go back then.
Yeah, that one's called Juncture, and that was cool because it was a local. When I was in Colorado, it was a local film crew, and they wanted everyone involved to be from the area, but they also shot in San Francisco and I think Utah or something. So they shot a couple different states, And it's not the best movie ever, but it's cool because my song's in the beginning of it.
Yeah. Well, and let's tie it in, man. So was it mostly plugins, right?
Yeah, so that back in that time, I was using Reason pretty much, I think, if I remember right. So it was a Reason track, which is basically just one giant VST.
Right. Right.
At least it was back then.
Right.
Yeah.
No, cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, they found the producer found me on MySpace, if you can believe that. That's how long ago. Like 2006, I think.
So good. That's like everybody's dream, though. That was my dream on my MySpace profile. Was some producer would find my music and throw it in a film, man.
Yeah,
that's like you won the lottery.
Exactly what happened. Yeah.
Oh,
it was great.
Took him like 2 months to contact you because that's how long it took to load the MySpace page with the background on it.
Yeah, you remember you used to be able to customize the HTML on your MySpace page.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And
I remember hearing about this Facebook thing. Like, what is that? That sounds stupid. That's what I remember.
And if I'd known you guys back then, you would have both been in my top 8.
Yes, along with Tom.
Oh, Tom.
Always, yeah.
Or Tom. So plugins, man.
Yeah, let's get to it.
Plugins. What do you guys think? Yeah, there's lots of different kinds of plugins. There's instruments. There's effects. There's just a glut of plugins available, especially these days. I'm curious. I know you guys kind of been in the game longer than me in terms of music. When did you guys first use plugins for anything? Do you remember?
You know, I the first computer recording I did, we talked about last week, was in the mid 90s, like 96, I think. So whatever was in Digital Performer, I don't remember it well enough to say if it had plugins or what, but I thought, you know, at least in my head, there was like some reverb or something that I was using in there. My first memories really after that would be probably like 98 or 99 and using, or maybe 97, I don't know. Was using Cakewalk and whatever stock plugins it had. I thought it was great because like I didn't have to hook up extra stuff, say for my vocal change, because you know I had a lot of guitar stuff and I had some microphones, but I didn't have vocal preamps and interface and you know that kind of stuff. I don't even remember maybe I had some sort of interface. It's been so long, but it was nice because when I was recording on like, you know, a little Tascam thing, I would have to get the microphone to 1/4-inch adapter, and then I would plug it into my like delay pedal and reverb pedal or something to run my vocals through guitar pedals at home. So when I got to the computer, it was pretty nice. Like, oh well, there's a delay plug-in here and reverb and compression, and I can start using those. And I think that was probably my first experience, like late 90s.
So not having to daisy chain a bunch of stuff for your effects is kind of what got you into it, or got you excited. Anyway?
Yeah, it got me excited because I didn't know anybody that was using a DAW, so Buddy and I got that Cakewalk stuff, and so when we found out there are effects already in there's like, well, this is bonus because now we get a little something else in here, and it makes life easier. You know, being able to go back and change settings after you've recorded something was a pretty big deal because everything was baked in. I mean, it was just like recording in the 60s on this, you know, cassette machine that was, you know, whatever you put into it, like if you got to change, if there's too much delay or something, you got to go back and re-record it.
Record the whole thing.
Yeah.
Do they call that destructive recording? Don't they have a term for that?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I might have it backwards. Non-destructive? I can't remember.
So non-destructive would be like the way that we mostly use plugins today, where you can go and change stuff or revert audio back to the previous state. Yeah. So this would be like, very permanent. Like what's done is done.
Yeah,
Baked in, as you say. Yeah.
Yeah.
baked in.
And yeah, okay. Well, let's see. Mine would have been in the first chance I kind of started
Sorry.
messing with Logic, because that was my first DAW for sure. 98. And there were some plugs on there. There was some pretty cool stuff on there. A couple things, you know. You couldn't load it up too much, even with a fairly decent computer running it, fairly powerful. You know, it still would bog it down. But that definitely was my first experience. I mean, with a DAW or plugins, and so that was a whole new world and really fun, and if not a bit frustrating to figure out how to try to do some automation with them, and you know, get into this new world that was now at my fingertips. And then really beyond that, I didn't kind of stopped using the DAW for a while, and went to this radar system by Otari, which is cool, and hard disk based digital recording. But then after that, Pro Tools. Immediately right after that was Pro Tools. So then of course it's everything that world brought. So yeah, same kind of thing though. We didn't start off with an HD system, but then got one later. So once you have the HD, well, back in the day, so I'm saying 2004, probably. Then it was cool because with HD it would run a number of plugs and be okay. But at first, any of the smaller rigs, it would choke up pretty fast. You had to really be sort of picking and choosing.
Yeah. So, how about you, Marshall?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I started in the computer realm because I was poor when I got into this stuff. But I would say I don't really count like plugins until I got to Pro Tools. And obviously when you bought Pro Tools, it came with a few plugins. I think there was like the Air suite with some effects. It had like a soft synth called Vacuum, which was awful. And so I wasn't really a big fan of those, but I remember. Sorry, what's that, Tim?
Oh, I just said, oh, I remember that Vacuum.
Yeah, Vacuum.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was like a sampler. I can't remember what it was called now. It's such a long time ago. But that was kind of my first foray into the plugin space. But the first one that I remember buying was Symphonic Instrument from Motu. And that gave semi-realistic sounding choirs and orchestral sounds. And it was really cool. I made some fun things with that. And I was like, wow, you got the power of like a whole orchestra on your computer now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I remember that, and then using T-Rax for effects. I had a T-Rax suite from IK Multimedia. And then it kind of spun off from there into some other stuff, but mostly like at that point I started accumulating hardware. So I wasn't as into the plugins at that point. That kind of slowly accumulated over time. But I'd say, yeah, the first thing I remember actually paying for was that Symphonic Instrument, which is a great plugin. It still works if you have an old version of Pro Tools.
Yes.
It doesn't work on the new one.
I had that too. I had Symphonic Instrument, and it was pretty great for what it was. I mean, it was definitely the coolest thing at that point that I knew of and could afford. Yeah, man.
It was before the big libraries like that Contact has, or even East West with their symphonic orchestra.
Right. No Spitfire stuff was.
Yeah, Spitfire. There wasn't anything like that yet that I know of.
Yeah. And if you treated it right and didn't ask it to do too many hijinks, it could sound pretty believable, just with some jabs or nothing too revealing that it's pretty limited actually. But at the time, it was like badass.
Yeah, and you could definitely like mix that in with some stuff, and it sounded pretty good actually. Yeah. Didn't have all the articulations that you may want, but still a lot of fun to play around with. And
yeah. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
I'll tell you, like when DAW, or at least when I got a DAW that had some of that stuff in there. So it was whenever GarageBand was released, and I started looking into that because I didn't have Logic yet, and to be able to have all these sampled instruments, and so I never invested into a Rompler during that time. So 90s, 2000s. In fact, I think I've had one thing that a King Korg that actually had a few samples in it, but it was really a virtual analog. But to have that kind of access all of a sudden, just like what you were saying, Marshall, like now my songs can be something much bigger. And, listening to, classic rock tracks that had, whatever string arrangements and organs and all these kind of things that I didn't have in hardware form. The only keyboard I had at the time was a Juno 106. And so, those kind of classic sounds or horns or anything like that, like I didn't have any access to it. So it was really kind of mind blowing to have plugins to be able to add those kind of instruments to tracks and start thinking outside of, I'm just in a rock band, but start thinking, wow, I can really make some more complex arrangements and have songs that kind of venture outside of the normal realm that I inhabit.
Yeah, kind of like you could do full on productions by yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do that before if you had a lot of instruments already, obviously. But with the plugins, especially if you had a halfway decent computer, like, yeah, you could be a one-man show or one-woman show if you're a girl, I guess. But,
Yes. Yeah, that's that definitely mind-blowing at the time. Like, all right, this is cool.
Yeah.
And then also just from a processing audio standpoint, I mean, the instruments were probably the most exciting thing to me ultimately, but then just from processing audio, wow, how amazing to be able to automate EQ and automate compression, and pretty great, right? Like that was mind blowing too. You could really sit there and sweat over a mix and get it to a point and then go too far, right?
Yeah. Spend way too much time dialing in that automation.
And go back to, then you end up going back to mix like, 4. After doing 25 of them, you go, yeah, mix 4 actually sounded great.
We'll go with that one.
We'll go with that one. But yeah, that, just the audio processing part of that too is really cool to me. And the fact that now we have like, gear emulation that was happening with those plugs, then it's like, oh, really? Like I can give it like a thicker sound, or I can make it like sound like a Trident, pre or something, or what? Like it can sound like a GML EQ, and that was mind blowing because while they weren't perfect at that time, they've certainly gotten so much better to the point that in some cases I think it's negligible what the difference is. And plus, if we're talking vintage gear, then who cares anyway? Because each individual component of that stuff sounds slightly different from itself and from others too. Anyway, right? So it's if it has the vibe of it or the character of it, great. As far as I'm concerned, close enough, and then it's not breaking down and crap.
I do think though that like for a while, the soft synths kind of had a VST sound to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't think that's really a thing now, but they definitely had a certain kind of sound, I think.
Yeah.
And whether or not you could tell in a full-on mix or not, I don't know. But I definitely remember playing around with some of them going, this thing kind of sounds like the other thing that I was just using.
Right. You think that's probably just like a sampling artifact or dithering or some sort of digital processing artifact?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, it could have just been a limitation in terms of the amount of processing power available, because now our systems are so powerful they can literally emulate, like especially with like the rolling cloud stuff. It sounds very, very good. And I remember using like the Arturia stuff before the V collection. So before they had any of that, they had like the Mini Moog V, and they had they might have had a Jupiter 8V and a couple other ones, and they were okay, but like I don't think they would have sounded anywhere nearly as good as the original, the actual hardware.
Yeah, I think some of it was probably a consequence of there just not being, as already mentioned, so much CPU. So there was a lot less that went into a model of a synth. In fact, it wouldn't have been component modeled. I think it ends up sounding the same because you're like, well, let's just start with a generic square wave and let's put it through a very generic 24 dB filter. Well, like everything with that architecture ends up sounding the very samey for quite a while until they start getting, oh, well, maybe we need to think about the gain staging and the saturation that happens in the circuit, or we need to figure out how to model the filter better. And then they start sounding better and better over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's got to have been driven by the fact that they just had a limit on power, on CPU, on processing.
Let me ask you guys about stock plugins and your DAW. So maybe make it two questions. So this first question. So we'll do one in the past, a question from the past, and a question from the present. But the question from the past: how long did you use just your stock plugins in your DAW, and what were a few of the first ones that you bought? When you you decided like, oh, there's something else out here that I'm going to buy. What did you get, and what did you think of it compared to your original stock stuff?
Marshall, take it, man.
So like I said, I think the first plugin I bought was that Motu Symphonic Instrument. I don't remember the first soft synth that I bought, but I remember just not ever really using the stock plugins for much. I would use the effects, EQs, delays, reverb, stuff like that. I would use the stock stuff there. But I don't remember the first soft synth that I actually bought. And today, obviously in Ableton, they've got some great plugins built in, that come with the system. The one that I'd probably use the most often is Operator, which is an FM synth, but I don't really use it for anything complicated. I usually just use it for sub bass and tracks because it's a pure sine wave, and it's that's what you want for that. That's pretty much it. I think still today though, other than a specific reverb, I like a reverb called Art Acoustic. It's made by Art Acoustic. See if I can remember what that one is called. It's a great little reverb. I think it's just called Art Acoustic Reverb. I can pull it up for you guys here. I use this all the time. I think this is actually a pretty old reverb, but I actually found out about this from watching an Ehrman Van Buren masterclass. And he was like talking about this reverb, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I should go check that out. And I went ahead and bought a copy of it, and I use it all the time. So I'd say this is probably my most commonly used effect plugin.
Cool.
It's not stock. But in Ableton, I still tend to use the stock EQs and compressors and stuff like that. I don't venture too far away from that.
But they sound great, right? I mean, and you know exactly what you're going to get out of them.
Yeah, and there's an 8-band EQ in there, so you can do plenty of things. You can automate all the stuff. And I know that there's other more expensive, EQs that you could buy, like what is it? Fab Filter has like a whole suite of stuff.
Yes.
I hear people talk about those. I don't know how much of a difference it makes. Honestly, you're just cutting frequencies out. So is it that big of a deal? I don't know.
Yeah, it probably is. Because in some ways, while you're cutting, it may be boosting on either side of it. If they're emulating a certain kind of older, piece of gear or whatever, or if it's just flat and cut. And like, I know it's weird, like thinking that passive EQ could have a sound to it, but I would guess that it does.
Yeah, it might be worth trying. I've never ventured into that side of it too much. Most of the VSTs I have are synths now. I don't have a whole lot in the way of effects. I've got some Waves plugins, but I don't really use those that often either. So,
yeah, but Ableton has, like, you've already got its plugs are already cool. Like there's a cool factor right there, I think.
Well, and the other thing is like the ones that are built into Ableton are optimized for Ableton, right? So they don't take up as much resources on the CPU as maybe a third-party one does too. So, and that's another that can be an issue. Now, my main system in here is not a problem. I can pretty much run anything I want, not have a big deal. But especially on my mobile rig where I'm running on a 10-year-old system, you got to be a little mindful of that.
Yeah.
How much CPU you're going to suck out of that thing.
Yeah. I would say for me, like, as far as like going back and what stock plugins did I use, since it was, I won't even really comment on Logic because I only used it just a little bit and then stopped and then went to Pro Tools. So I'll pick up with Pro Tools for more of a better perspective. And with that, all of those stock plugins weren't too terrible. And with anything, I'd just like to comment, with any of those, once you spent a little time with them and you understand what their quirks are and how they work and how you can kind of get the most out of them, you really press the limits much further than even than kind of what they're designed to do, because you're using your ears so much more. Then you're not just kind of relating on the fact that it's a stock plugin, it's okay. But once you kind of learn how to massage it, in a way, then you can really get some pretty great results and use your ears. So even if you're having to do weird things like put 3 instances of EQ back to back, or something in the chain, you just kind of learn, how do I get close to something that sounds like X, or what I'm hearing in my head anyway. And then so it's kind of been a fun thing for me to discover that about the limitations. That's really all I had. So you just sit there and you really hone it and just work on it until you can get something that's cool. It's time consuming, but that would be the big difference for me. But back then, that's all I really had was stock plugs. So it was worth it to me to go ahead and spend the time and see what I could do with them. Yeah. The 1176 that comes with Pro Tools is something I still use almost all the time. It's just, I know what it's going to do and it sounds good. So I definitely use it quite a bit. Even the Pro Tools EQs, they're little 1 band and 3 band or whatever, 7 band, 5 band, 7 band. Those are cool if it's not if it's not a super forward instrument, but if you start, they're fine. And they're definitely, I will throw them on there to do cuts and filtering and whatnot. Because like you're saying, Marshall, like do you hear it? And I think in some instances you probably can, but I know that those are real stable with Pro Tools. And so if I'm just doing something that's sort of just really a basic move like that, then those are good. But
I always just felt with the stock EQs and compressors, I still get great results. So
yeah. And I even used that vacuum synth because that's what I had, man. So I would mess with that till something would happen. It out of you can get a few cool tones out of it.
I wouldn't know.
But
I didn't use it long enough. I pulled it up, I think, a couple times just to be like, what is this thing? And I was like, oh, this is crap. I didn't use it.
Well, and it generally was. But again, if anything that you kind of just get to know a little bit, or at least you can find like something.
I will say I do like the air effects, and I actually bought the VST versions of those so I can use them in Ableton. I don't use them as often as I once did, because when I transitioned from Pro Tools to Ableton, I was so used to those that I wanted them still. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and when I was using Pro Tools, when that first happened, and whatever, again, 03, 04, I was using they have a little grand piano plug-in, and they had a DB3, I think it was called, a B3 emulation. And none of these were great. But if you didn't ask too much of them and didn't do too many moves on them that said, you're an imposter, you can hear it. Then just in a track, if you're just like playing some rhythm parts or whatever, those worked out all right. They sounded okay. And I did a few solo things where it would just be like a piano vocal, and it would be that piano, which not really great. But like the DB3 in a track, with some distortion on it and whatnot. You can kind of get away with that. The rotary's not great. None of it's really great, but in a track and kind of just like sitting back in the mix a little, it's like, that's all right. So I definitely use those things a lot. That's what came with it. And then I think like the first plug-in I got was like purchased. It wasn't stock. There was a GML EQ that I really thought sounded cool. And there were the kind of Tube Tech emulation EQ, the EQ-P1, I think it was. So, and it does weird things like that. When you cut, it boosts just gently before the cut, and sometimes
like a pull tech.
Exactly, kind of like a Tube Tech. Tube Tech being the imitator of pull tech, for sure, okay. Yeah. So it would have that style. So there's something that you could hear a little difference in just in doing a passive move. It's actually adding something active to it. But yeah, those were probably the ones I ended up using quite a bit. And the Renaissance plugins that they had that were available for Pro Tools weren't bad. I'm trying to think on what I had on the master bus. It kind of varied. If there was like ultra maximizer kind of thing, and just hitting it lightly, not too much. But yeah, I think those were mostly like. That's a great question, though, Chris. So like, for you?
Yeah, well, I used stock plugins for at least couple of years in GarageBand, and I think after a couple of years, I switched over to Logic just to be able to do more. And of course, Logic came with more content, so it kept me pretty busy for a while. But the one thing that it didn't have in there at the time was guitar amp simulation, and so I thought, well, that would be a nice thing to have. A buddy of mine had gotten IK Multimedia's Amplitude, I think it was version 2, I mean, way back in the day. And I thought, well, this is cool. And I was familiar with the Line 6 and the pod and all that kind of stuff. So I had, even though I didn't use that in my guitar rig, I was kind of familiar, like, well, let's see if we can make this work. And it was okay. And then every version just got better and better. So I think Amplitude may have been my first purchase, and the second and third would have been the second would have been an instrument, which was Sampletron, which was the only, well, as far as what I could find anyway, it was one of the first Mellotron plugins that were available, and I was just nuts about the Mellotron. So man, I was so ecstatic. I mean, we these days plugins are so numerous, and you can grab so much stuff, and it's all immediately available. But I think I got a box copy of that shipped to me, and I got that loaded onto my computer, and I was off to the races.
You guys remember going to the shop and buying a physical copy of the VST and then putting the disc in your? You remember that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Let's say when I got Logic, it came in. It was like this box set of CD-ROMs or whatever that you just go in disc after disc, loading the content for all their instruments and stuff.
I'll tell you what.
And you had to.
Yeah, when I bought the Symphonic Orchestra from East West, it's like a stack of DVDs, and it takes like 3 days to install.
Yeah.
Well, at least when I first bought Contact or whatever, and then Complete Ultimate, it was 10, so I'm a few behind now. But it at least came with like a hard drive, and then, but it still took like 5 hours to load all that content in. I mean, it's literally was a right around 500 gig of content that had, and that was like 10. I'm sure it's way bigger now. I think they're on 13 at least.
Yeah, I still use my Symphonic Orchestra, but what I got smart about it a long time ago, and I have them all, like all the sound libraries are on an external hard drive.
Yeah.
And I've got like the Ministry of Sound one, I've got the Choirs one, the Storm Drums 2. So I've got like several of the East-West libraries, and I just have them all on an external drive. That way, if I refresh my system here, I just pull play, the actual plugin, to the library directory, and it works.
Yeah, that's great.
It's huge time saver.
Since yeah, and since the dependability now has happened with SSD, or even the fact that that's happened. I mean, with a standard, spinning drive, I was not too sure that was going to work great if you were using it kind of as a live thing. You could certainly program it and put it in and record it. But yeah, if it's sitting there chasing all that audio live, it gets pretty hung up. But yeah, now, right, that's exactly the thing, right, with SSD for sure. And that's the thing to do, is keep all those big libraries off on an external.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also makes it nice that the speed of these things are so much faster. I've got a little drive, and I'm, it's got a USB-C connector, but
nice.
I think it's a
I didn't even know they made
Thunderbolt.
those with USB-C now. That's cool.
Yeah, I think it's. Can't remember if it's. Yeah, I think it's USB-C, and then I mean the speed is crazy on them, and loading sample libraries and things like that are very fast. And then I've slowly been moving some of them, the sampled instrument content to this drive, because when I do upgrade my computer, I'm going to keep the laptop. I've just got a 2019 MacBook Pro, and that'll just be my regular, surf the internet or whatever computer. But I would like to get a Mac Studio in here at some point, like maybe when they get the M2 processors in there. And then at least it won't be as sophisticated as a Marshall system, but at least a lot of the stuff that I would have to download or install will just be on that drive. So that'll make life easier.
It literally saves hours and hours of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You literally just install it the one time, and then it's always there, on that backup drive, assuming you don't lose that drive. But make a copy of that too, I guess.
Yes, lots of copies. Yeah, that's what I did. I just got this little guy too today. This is just a little. It's USB-C as well, 2 terabyte.
Yeah,
it's like it's tiny. It's that big. But
size, got it.
Pretty cool.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what's your guys' go-tos? Get some go-tos?
Go for it, Tim.
Yeah. I'll take it. Yeah, sure. Oh man, definitely. Let's see. One of the first things that happens. Well, on the bus, I definitely use the L1 Ultra Maximizer. I always have that on there. I don't always crank it up though. I really kind of have a tendency to set it in a slightly lower setting, and then towards the end, if I kind of want to heat the mix like it's quasi-mastered, I'll turn it up. But those can also get out of control. Anyway, that's definitely a go-to. I still love the Waves SSL G series channel strip. That thing to me still sounds fantastic. The compression is decent if you don't go overboard with it. The EQ sounds super sweet to me. So that's all. I still go to that one. In fact, I just got. Let's see if I can show this. Hold on a second. I just picked up. They have a V2 version of it, which is it's on sale right now. And so I was like, yeah, I'll get it. Let's see if I can just dial that in while we're talking. But anyway, yeah, because it's just I use that all the time. And honestly, I still use that original 1176 that came with Pro Tools. That's just a workhorse. It sounds nice. It's adjustable. You can do some basics with it that are pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then, VST wise, I use this every time. It's so funny because in the last 2 years since I've met you guys and just before, I've just had converted to so much hardware motion that I kind of pulled back from too many VSTs. But I do definitely have complete, and which is cool. But Omnisphere you can always find something usable on there, especially if you kind of make your own little user memory slots, so you don't have to go searching because there's so many sounds in that thing. But they're very musical. I still like that. And Keyscape, also by Spectrasonics, use it all the time. It's just great. It's just great for any kind of basic keyboard sounding thing. And then they have like what they call like a creative branch or whatever of sounds, where they've sort of gnarled them up a little bit, distorted them. Decapitator is definitely one that I use on a lot of things, snare drums and vocals and like
that's a Sound Toys.
It's a Sound Toys, yeah, distortion box basically. I mean, but it's much more than that. But I use that all the time. That's distortion is so what a handy thing that is to have. Just a little you know, it really is. Like all of a sudden, it really makes something stand out. It can also push it way back in the mix, can it? Like if you really oversaturate it, it can make it real splatty and smeary, and so it pushes it back in the mix. But if you just add just enough to give it some punch, that's a great sounding thing. So yeah, Decapitator's always something I go to. Delay wise, I mean, the Sound Toy stuff, period, is super musical. It's super awesome, and they have that rack version where you can rack up a bunch of the effects at once and do user presets that way. That's amazing. What else do I really like to go to? I tend to use actually the NI replica delay, which is pretty cool. What else do I use all the time? Like all the time. What gets used? Put thrown in there no matter what. I like that there's a bus comp that is also a NI native instrument device, and I keep that sitting on my mix bus too. It's disabled or whatever. It's inactive, but it's deactivated. But as soon as I kind of feel like I'm getting close on a mix, I like to push that in there to see, okay, what's that doing? And it's basically trying to emulate an SSL bus comp. It's got that sort of flavor. Yeah, those would probably be the ones that are like immediately go-tos.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying about like the ones that you know how to use, you're going to go to, and I think like when you find something that sounds good, that's where it's good to spend the time and go, I need to master this particular one, because if I can get this one, and if I can master it, then I won't have to use a whole bunch of other ones. So I tend to see that happening for myself, where I've got a lot of plugins. I like to see what's out there, but I do try to spend some time on a select amount of them. So I think like with my basic template, I'm just kind of having a look at it. Yeah. So some of my essential ones that I use like pretty much every project. So for drums, I use Easy Drummer 3 more than anything else, and I have some other drum programs like XLN XO, or there's the Logic drum machine. I don't remember what it's called, but a few other things like that. But probably Easy Drummer is what I go to first for those kind of sounds. And then for bass and guitars, my templates will usually have amplitude for bass, and I'll have a couple guitar tracks ready to go, like lead and rhythm guitar, and then I can duplicate channels if I'm going to do like left and right takes and things like that. But depending on, I mean, that's where I'll be real picky, and it's kind of hard to say, oh, this is my rhythm guitar sound, because it really depends on what I'm doing. So if it's more like a vintage style amplifier, old Fender Tweeds or something like that, the newer amplitude models are really great. A few other amps that I use a lot would be the Mixwave Benson Chimera, and that's a great like kind of vintage sounding amp. Also soft tube stuff like the Lemmy, and of course the Neural DSP. Those are big favorites and get used a lot. And then some plugins that get used quite a bit over and over. So been using Actually, I think it was like my second or third plugin that I bought was a Valhalla Uber mod, and it was just blew my mind about what it could do. And it was before people were really talking about Valhalla stuff. Like now, everybody knows what it is, but I just thought, got this plugin. I was like, man, this guy really knows what he's doing, and hasn't disappointed. So I've got all the Valhalla stuff, but there's been a couple that. I've kind of keyed, actually 3 really that I've keyed in that are pretty much on everything, and that's the Vintage Verb, which is kind of like a lot of it's very like 80s lexicon sounding, Supermassive, which are all my big reverb sounds. I love Supermassive, and Valhalla delay is like my utility delay. It's like, oh, I need some delay for a guitar solo. I know how to use it well. I'm going to go and I've got some preset stuff that I've made for how I like my mixes. And then some of my other favorites would be like some of the Pulsar modular stuff. So P42 Climax, which is, I use it for a lot of different things because it was an emulation of the old Wolf box that was used in Motown Records, which is basically just kind of a transformer direct box. But the way that it sounded and the kind of subtle saturation and characteristics of the transformer gave some of those classic bass lines their sound. So I use that a lot on bass, and also because they added a whole bunch of EQ and some saturation, different types of saturation to it, that ends up being one of those modules which I can use for a lot of different things. And again, it's just one that like I spent a lot of time working with it, and I know it really well, and it has a great sound, so it's one that gets used a lot. And then some of the other plugins I've been using a lot would be Lunar Lander, and which is a reverb and analog delay, and Siren is a filter. And on the mix bus, or between mixing and kind of my hinky mastering ability, a couple of them that I really like would be I use a lot of T-Rack stuff. I've been using the T-Rack stuff for a long time, and like you said, Tim, there's when you find something and it works. So their 1176 has been one that I just know well, and I use it on instruments a lot. And so I've got some other stuff that's in the queue to get tested a lot more. But when I'm in the middle of things, I don't want to go and experiment and play around with this other company's stuff. So I tend to go to that one. But T-Rack's their tape machine stuff is really great. So that gets used, and the Sonable Smart Limiter, the version 2, is just fantastic. That thing is really, really pretty impressive, and so that gets used every time at the end. And then for channel strips, you had mentioned the SSLG, and I've been using the Brainworks SSL, was it 4000E? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've got a bunch of different channel strips, but and I like them that SSL 9000 or the API or the Neve stuff. But the one that really kind of I feel like has my sound is the 4000E, and it has just a certain thing that it does, especially on guitars, that just feels very rock, and it just can be just the right amount of aggressive to really bring those kind of sounds to life. But those would probably be the ones that I use the most. Of course, with Logic, it's like if you got to do a little bit of EQing, I just pop that Logic EQ on there. I've got some stuff that's a lot more sophisticated, like the Kirchhoff EQ, and that's phenomenal. But I just need to get into using it more, because you can do so much with it. It's nuts. But if it's something that's just real quick, Logic EQ, Logic compressors are great, and then I use a lot of the utility modules. Like if you need some do some gain staging or something like that, those simple in your DAW utilities work so well. But yeah, I'd say those are like the most used ones. Except, well, I didn't talk about synthesizers, but I'd say for like effects and things, those are what I use.
Tim, what you got here?
Oh, this is a channel strip that I was just going to show you guys. It's been out for a couple of years or so.
Oh yeah, that's a Waves.
Ships. Yeah.
Sheps, yeah, it's the Sheps Omni channel. This thing, it's not very expensive. I think it's about $35. And I saw a demo on it like a year and a half ago. And I thought that's pretty cool. And so I finally broke down and got it about, I don't know, 6-8 months ago. And I haven't used it a whole ton, but I will say that it sounds really cool, and it's got a lot of great. I love the tone option on here for one thing. It's great in the EQ section, but it's really got it's musical sounding, and it can get aggressive, but it can also be pretty transparent. I've been really impressed with this for a channel strip, and it has a lot of processing possibilities on it. So I just wanted to bring that one up for anybody else that may have used it or not. It's quite cool.
I've got some Wave stuff, but I don't have this. Is this so? When you use this, do you just put it per track? You just put that whole thing on there?
Yeah, that's what.
Like a signal flow through this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just put it as an insert, basically. Yeah.
Because that looks like just about everything you'd want.
Yeah, it's definitely a full-featured channel strip there with compressor and gate, and you can do a little saturation on the pre-end of it, which is great.
That's cool.
Yeah, EQ and that tone control is fun. It's just kind of a different flavor. Yeah, it's actually really, really good and really versatile, and it can get, like I said, really aggressive, or you can just kind of have it doing some processing in the background that you don't notice, but that's really helpful. I mean, it's not like blatantly obvious. And then speaking of that, so let's talk about plugins and how you use plugins when you want to do something that's a slap in the face with a big mackerel. Just like smack. Here's a fish across your cheek. What do you guys like to use when you're really going for like making a statement? Marshall?
I would say I like to use Omnisphere is probably my favorite plugin of all time, and I use that quite a bit, just because it literally can do almost anything.
Yeah,
it's great. And I have a few other things I can pull up.
I wish that I had my. I can't pull up Pro Tools or anything I have on this computer because I'm just here traveling very light, and I don't even have my dongle with me, so I can't. I'm trying to speak from memory, so guys, I'm sorry if I don't have quite the information at my fingertips that you guys.
I don't know if this counts as a plugin. I guess it's a plugin, but it's for the Axis virus. It's their plugin that allows you basically to control your virus as a plugin, which I love. So I use this a lot. The virus I have is a TI2. It's rack mounted, and I hate, I'm not going to get down on the floor and use it. So I use this, which is great.
But you use that for programming or automation?
For anything. And the cool thing with the virus is it's multi-timbral. And I have a video on my channel called The Ultimate Virus Setup, where I put together a template for Ableton to use this to its maximum potential. So, and I gave it, it's available, like the template's available for anyone to download and use if you want. Because it's 16-part multi-timbral. It's got USB streaming for up to 3 stereo channels. Plus there's another 3 analog outputs on the synth as well. So it's super powerful. And the cool thing is, with the integration with this, you can program it and do everything from your DAW and not have to touch the synth, which is great.
Very cool, yes.
So then also we've got the play from East West. And like I was telling you guys, I basically have all my different banks here, and you can just go in and pick one And I can replace this, and it'll switch over to the other one once it loads. It's great. This is a great plugin.
Nice.
So, and like I was saying, it's all loaded up on an external drive. So I can just pick the bank I want and go to town. And then, of course, you got Blue ARP, and I do actually like the Rolling Cloud stuff quite a bit. I use this TR909 like all the time.
Yeah,
I think a combination of 909 and 808 from the cloud are just
totally
great.
agree.
Yeah, and you know, there's the issue where, yeah, it's subscription based, but I signed up early, like very, very early. So every 12 months, I get one added to my like lifetime list. I think I'm up to like six of them. So and I'm pretty sure like I get a couple more, and I may not need it anymore because I think I'll pretty much have everything I want from there, which is nice. But I don't think they do that anymore.
They offer it periodically. I've got I think I'm up to 8, and my subscription runs out in December. Like 8, like, well, for what you have out now, that's more than enough for me. So I'll probably get out, and then if in the future they add something that I really want, I mean, to me, I look at it as like it's a way to get the plugins for cheaper when they have the Play 2 for life or whatever, because you get 2 plugins per year, and so yeah, I get it that way. Otherwise, I wouldn't mess with the subscription at all.
Yeah,
but it wouldn't bother.
And you can buy them individually. You can buy the, you know, perpetual license or whatever.
Yeah. But it ends up being more money than the subscription.
The subscription, yeah. And plus, you get access to all the other stuff. I really am happy that they added stuff like the JD800. That is awesome.
I gotta say the Soft Tube is really killing it on the Roland stuff, though. Their 106, man, it's better than Cloud.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. The only thing, the thing that sucks about it though, is that I don't understand their mindset, because SoftTube will do stuff like they'll add features to it. Like there's a panel that shifts over and it's got these other things, unison, things like that, or unison detune and stereo spread or something. I don't remember. All these extra features, but they don't give you the damn second envelope that you'd want to have for a 106 like that Roland Cloud does. And I really appreciate that Roland did that they've offered some useful addition in their features, because I felt like SoftTube kind of missed it on that. But their SH101 and the Juno 106 are just amazing. They're really good. So when before I gave my 106 to my buddy, I went through all the major ones I thought were good, like the Tal, between the different Juno models like the Tal, the Roland, SoftTube, and what else do I have? I can't remember what else, but I had probably 4 or 5, and went through, and the SoftTube sounded the most like my original Juno. It was impressive.
You guys ever, speaking of like doing some radical plug-in usage, you guys ever put, like, for instance, distortion after reverb?
Oh, that's like shoegaze territory there.
Or like delay after reverb, where you're like,
no,
coming in and out.
No, Tim.
See, I'm glad you said no, because now I'm inspired to do it even more.
Incorrect. No, I mean, obviously you do whatever you want, but yeah, my signal flow definitely doesn't go that way. I usually I might do a limiter in the beginning, into an EQ, then into some delay, then reverb, and then a compressor at the end. That's pretty typical for me in a signal chain.
That's your standard kind of thing. I'm just asking for anything that you do that is a no-no, that's like really radical, and He's like, no, I don't do that.
Well, you might be able to get, obviously, I mean, that's the cool thing about plugins, right? It's really easy to do stuff the wrong way and see what happens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just put it in the wrong order to look, something interesting happens. I do think it's cool to have, distortion on verb and just kind of build that in as part of the sound. It starts really becoming this other thing. I think it's cool.
Yeah, well, yesterday, so just not having a lot of energy, I decided to listen to a few albums. And I listened to, just as I'm on the computer, so I listened to Neil Young's Zuma this morning. And yesterday, I listened to Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, which, I mean, the way that they were doing stuff was kind of crazy. I can't remember when that album was released, early 90s probably. But the whole shoegaze movement, that was one of the things that they would do. And again, it's just like, why would you do that? That's got to sound awful. But they would run, the reverb before their distortion in their signal chain on their guitars. And then they would do some stuff that was kind of interesting in terms of like recording guitars, because the album's known to have like this really massive sound. It's a great album if you haven't heard it. But one of the things that they did was on their like Jazz Masters, or Fender Jazz Masters, is they have these really long whammy bars. It says jazz, but it's like a surf guitar. What you think for surf guitars? But the thing is, like in the the 80s, they were super uncool, but all the alternative bands were picking up. Yeah. Guys like Elvis Costello and The Cure, and people finding these kind of quirky old guitars. But what they would do is they'd be recording their guitar tracks, and they would separate, I don't know how many guitar tracks out into the stereo field. And as they would strum, they would be holding on to the whammy bar, and the whammy bar would be just slightly shifting the pitch as they were strumming. And if you can imagine, maybe having 4 guitar tracks. I know some of their tracks had dozens of guitar tracks, but all just slightly different pitch, playing the same chords and some different positions on the guitar, whatever, D down low and D up high and things like that. And, when we think about synthesizers and some of these classic old synthesizers, or in some of the new ones that, have that kind of dimensionality, because the oscillators are not all perfectly in tune, and they're just doing that thing, beating against each other slightly. But they did that with the guitars. And then, of course, this other sound element of them running reverb into distortion of some sort, and which has, again, it's not a hi-fi type of sound. It's a character type of sound. It's unusual. How have you been using it like that, Tim, with the reverb into some overdrive or distortion or whatever?
Just as kind of sealing it as one little instrument sounding thing, and it just really helps separate the verb. What happens when you start using a lot of reverb is it just kind of, the mix starts getting washed out so fast. But if you want to use a bunch of it, but if you color it really different from something that's got a nice trail to it and lots of reflections, and it's kind of pretty sounding or whatever, that's cool too, right? But like, if you EQ it radically or put it through some distortion, or I've even like for a vocal, I've side chained the vocal and side chained the reverb to the vocal, so where when the vocal is first happening, there's no verb, and then when the vocal stops, the wash comes in. Like just finding interesting ways to kind of use reverb, but just not in the standard way. And even pre-delay is like pretty amazing. You can get sort of radical with pre-delay. That's sort of what that sidechaining thing does. But I just love the tone of collapsing the verb in some distortion. It really gives it a whole different thing. And go ahead.
Sorry, just about what you said, actually, we should hit on, because one of the advantages of having plugins is you're talking about adding some pre-delay, and there are so many ways to do it, and people are all across the board as far as how they do things. Like, people are like, you turn it till it sounds good, and that's it. And other people are like, they're doing their calculus for the time of the delay and the milliseconds and the BPM and all this. And one of the brilliant things is that having a plugin within a DAW, and the plugin has syncing features, delays and reverbs in particular, it ends up being such a useful tool that if you want to time it in such a way, you're not having to do a whole bunch of calculations or sit there and turn it until it sounds perfect, because you can go, well, if I want to have a pre-delay that's in time with the beat, well, that's easy now. You can just set it into there. Oh, I want it to be on an eighth or a quarter or whatever.
Yeah.
No problem. It's so easy. We've gotten so used to that before, back in the olden days, like, well, my song's BPM is 95 beats per minute. See, what kind of pre-delay do I need? I need to convert that to milliseconds and then find
You gotta be a rocket scientist. It's like programming FM or something over there.
Right. That's no fun. That takes all the fun out of it.
I did want to touch on real quick, guys. There is one plugin that none of us have talked about yet that I use on everything. You ready for this?
Drum roll, please.
Ozone, baby.
Ozone. Oh, yeah.
I use this. I've been using Ozone since version 4. I think actually, if I come over here to my drawer, and the cool thing is with Ozone is, I've got 5 back to 5 installed, but I have a key for 4 as well, all the way up through 9. So the cool thing is with Ozone is you can dump this on your master bus and you can create a chain here. And this is pretty typical of a chain that I would use: an EQ into an exciter, some dynamic compression, dynamic EQ, imager, and then maximizer. But you can actually use these different, utility plugins here individually on tracks as well. So you don't have to dump the whole thing on here. You could use just the equalizer or just the exciter or whatever you want, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool.
Sounds great. And now the thing that's kind of weird though is now they're doing it so they have like an AI thing built into it now where it'll kind of master your track for you. Have you guys tried any of that kind of stuff?
Well, the Sonable Smart, like the smart limiter that I have, has some of that AI stuff built into it. So some of the nice things is it will, it'll check a course of the song and find out like here, if you want to be at this level, which by the way, like it's again removing a step for you to have to figure things out. You're like, well, I'm gonna put this track on YouTube or SoundCloud or Spotify or whatever. It already knows the good levels for it to be for each of those services. So you can set it like, hey, I'm mixing for YouTube. Oh, okay. And then it sets up and it does its thing and it sets all the settings to where it thinks it should be, and then you can go and it starts at a really great place. It's getting really good, and you go and you take, well, I want a little more saturation, I want a little more of this or that. But yeah, I think it's been some of these tools are being getting pretty good.
It could definitely give you a good starting point, at least, especially if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah,
but I don't use it, but it's there.
Well, I think it really depends on, how it's been programmed and who's doing it, because some of them that I've used have not really been that great. But like, and even within the same company, Sonable's Smart Reverb sounds like crap to me, but their limiter and compressor are awesome. And sometimes, one thing that I find useful about these things, again, like you said, they're a starting point. They just kind of put you in the ballpark, and then you can it saves you the time of having to get there. But one of the interesting things is actually more in the mixing part of it. Like if I'm working on something, I'm like, man, there's just something that's not working for me about this. Like say something like, I don't record acoustic guitars a whole lot, right? So, but I've done it. I've been doing it for years. But there's some times where I'm just not feeling it. And I'm like, ah. And so pulling out like a smart EQ and a smart compressor and going, let's see what you will do with this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it comes back and you're like, wait, hold on a second. And then I'll go and I'll check some reference tracks. I'm like, well, that's really interesting decision there. And so in my own mind, I think I'm pretty heavy-handed with the compressor. I'm like, wow, I'm really compressing it here. And then I go and have it check it. And then I check my reference track and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not really that heavy-handed at all. In fact, I'm pretty light. I'm pretty conservative about the amount of compression that I'm adding. So then it kind of gives me another data point here, like, well, maybe why don't I try some more compression, which I wouldn't have intuitively thought to do because it's not the way that I've been doing it. But then when you hear it,
yeah, it's almost like having somebody else do it for you. It's like another person sitting there going, "Why don't you try it like this?" But it's a robot.
Yeah,
well, that's sort
but
of
some of yeah, I mean, some of the greatest decisions have come because you're hanging out with a friend and they do things differently than you, and so when you go and you sit and you do it, you're like, well, why did you do it like that? That's those knobs don't look like they're in the right position, and then
No,
you hear it and
Tim.
you're like,
No, Tim.
oh, you're just egging me on. I love the nose. The nose are the best thing to do. There's a Sound Toys has a plugin called Crystallizer, which is a granular basically thing, and you can have it shift octaves, and I mean it can get super wild or just be pretty tucked back and kind of tame. But on my record, Heartfelt Absurdities, at the very end, I just decided I want the whole mix to go through this plugin, and it just starts swirling and bubbling, and it just kind of gets destroyed, and then cut it off. But what I realized, kind of maybe where that was coming from, was like back in the day when they would put phasers on the whole mix, like in the 70s kind of thing. When they first started doing that, and I thought, this effect is so freaking 3D and wild. It is not like a stereo phaser, It just kind of makes the whole thing just be almost unrecognizable. And we just kind of brought it up, turned the mix up a little more and more and more and more until it's just kind of this insanity moment. And then it drops out to just like a keyboard thing, but very effective and very raw.
Cool, yeah. Do you guys use that's one thing nobody mentioned, is any kind of flanger, or you just mentioned some phasers there, but
yeah, has phases. Phases is kind of cool. It's like a stereo phaser. It's pretty cool, pretty simple, but it's got a thing. In fact, I just was using it on my one of those tracks I was talking about earlier in the show.
What's it called?
Phasis, Phassis.
I've got a phaser. What is it called?
It is pretty cool. I mean, it's a little on steroids, but it's not insane.
I have this guy called Phase Motion. Have you guys seen this before? I use this.
No.
It's a real basic kind of phaser, and I usually put it on a bus and just kind of add it a little bit here and there, especially on like hi-hats.
Oh, there you go.
For hi-hats or crashes, like mostly like those kind of high end in terms of frequency type sounds. I like to add a little bit of phaser to those.
Yeah, that gives it some motion too.
Yeah, it's phase motion.
That's what it's all about.
Pretty smart.
That's about phasers and
right? It's cool to have that motion so they're not static.
Yeah, exactly.
That's about phasers and flangers, and I've had many dozens, probably hundreds of vintage phasers and flangers. This is one that I have the original box for this as well. It's a Mutron Phasor 2, but I've had Maestro. I've had the biphase, which is like two of these in a box, and all sorts of stuff. Vintage ADA flanger, Electric Mistress, all that kind of stuff in pedal or rack form, and I really love those sounds, and it's nice that so many of these are getting modeled now, in plugins, because again, like we were talking about with being able to do sync stuff, being able to move its position in the signal chain even after you've recorded something. So the Arturia biphase is a great one I go to quite a bit, and flangers I'm really picky about. I do, I've got the ADA stuff and the Electric Mistress, in plugin form. One that actually I use a lot, there's a free plugin that's called Valhalla Space Modulator. And I don't know if it's just straight up free now. It used to be that if you bought any Valhalla plugin, then you'd be able to download this one also for free. And it's a really simple modulator. I mean, there's not much to it. But it's just good sounding. It's just a great sounding modulator, and I go to that a ton. But my favorite phalanging by far has always been like tape phalanging. And there's so many great like Bucket Brigade style flangers in plugin form now. The latest one that I got was the Clear Mountains Phases. Was that Apogee? But it's got some great old like Bucket Brigade flangers and old style phase shifter stuff, which are great. But I love that through zero sound of the old school like Beatles, Jimi Hendrix. To me, like one of the just effects that blew my mind is like when I first started playing, listening to rock stuff and then hearing Axis Bold as Love by Jimi Hendrix, and on the title track Bold as Love, it goes through the song, which is an amazing song, and it's one of probably my second favorite Hendrix song, maybe my favorite. And then it just stops at the end, like they finish the song, and then all of a sudden Mitch is doing his drum roll, and on that drum roll, all of a sudden the phalanging's coming in, and just as you were saying, they flange the entire mix of it. It's nuts. And then when the guitar solo comes in, of course, it's all shifting around through zero phalanging, and that I just never had heard anything like that. I had no vocabulary to describe what I was hearing, and I was like, what is this sound? Like, I have to have this sound.
Yeah.
Now, the bummer for me is that there's not too many like tape flange sounds available. There's a lot of like digital and Bucket Brigade style, but not too many. I mean, Waves has one. Their what's it called? The Real ADT, which you can do like, again, that very like Beatles and Jimi Hendrix style flanging. And I have used that a little bit, but I wish somebody else, would do maybe a better version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I'm sitting here looking for this. Something I use a lot that can do that type of thing. It's not what you're talking about. It's not like straight up dedicated to flanging, but it's just tape emulation. Basically, is the Abbey Road J37.
mm-hmm.
That's a pretty cool plugin. I use that one actually a lot. I didn't really mention that, but not only can you sort of lo-fi things and get some saturation, but some nice wow and flutter, which wow and flutter is something I seem to use quite a bit. I try to keep it a little under the radar that's what's happening, like,
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're trying to make it super dramatic, but like that can really add interest to kind of a more stagnant sound.
Yeah.
If you guys do that,
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably use that.
And with those tape emulations, to me, they feel like they kind of come in two categories. One that are like really just straight ahead, like the IK Multimedia tape machines. It's like, this is like using a Studer or whatever in a studio. You're not doing anything fancy with it. You're just getting that slight bit of coloration and compression. And then the other ones that are a little more like effecty or more like a tape echo machine, like an Echoplex or Space Echo or anything like that. And any of those that have control over the wow or flutter, if you're running it at zero delay and at full mix, that wow and flutter is going to show up as more of like a vibrato sound. But if you have a mix control on it, bringing it back to 50%, then all of a sudden that vibrato of the wow and flutter becomes like a chorusing or a flanging for it, and then finding the interesting spaces in there, so that anything that has that kind of retro tape sound but also mix control and the wow and flutter, you can get some of those really cool, and they tend not to sound quite as cyclical or static as
Right.
like an LFO driven modulation.
Yeah, they're not as periodic. They're a little more chaotic, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I love these. And whenever I use that particular J37 plug tape emulator, I never try to make it sound like tape. It's really, I'm just kind of pressing it to do other things until it does something interesting. And definitely the wow and flutter and the saturation on that thing is interesting, and delay. And you can select, biasing and tape types. But again, like, I'm never really trying to sit there and make it behave like, oh, that sounds just like a J37 or something. It's like, no. It's not an EMI thing. It's this weird, cool effect that this is facilitating me to get to. It just kind of inspires me to do some different things.
Heck yeah. Well, guys, we could probably go on for hours on this topic, but I think it's probably about wrap-up time.
Indeed, sir.
Well, it was a good first exploration of plugins. I mean, we didn't get too specific about anything, but I think that's been kind of the fun thing about how we've started all of this. Is it's just been some like, what do you guys do? Like, what's your world like? And I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys too in the same way, and everybody in the chat, for chiming in and offering their perspectives. And it's making this show to me really interesting, really fun, and not just kind of the run of the mill sort of normal format. I feel like what we're doing is entertaining, but definitely informative, and it's fun, and we're just allowing it to go places. We appreciate you guys as listeners for allowing us to do that, and actually even enjoying that. So that's definitely one of the missions, I suppose, if there are missions per se for this live stream, is to let it go on those side tangents so we can learn from each other little things that we wouldn't think about, that we might not have time to talk about if it were in a real super cut and dry question and answer setting. So
yeah, we can get a little deeper into the weeds, so to speak, and veer off here and there, which is good.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I guess then that does wrap us up for this week, and we'll see you next week. And thanks again for joining us. And Cryss, Marshall, you guys take it easy, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely.
All right.
Look.
Take care, Tim. Marshall.
Bye, guys.
Oh, bye. Hey, that means I got to do something right now.
What's that?